The morning sun cast long shadows across the rugged landscape of West Texas as Lonely Rancher guided his weathered horse, Thunder, through the mesquite-dotted terrain near the Rio Grande. At 43, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had seen too much hardship, his steel-gray eyes constantly scanning the horizon for trouble. The year 1887 had brought nothing but drought and desperation to this corner of the frontier, where decent folks struggled to survive while outlaws thrived. Lonely Rancher had earned his nickname honestly. For 15 years, he'd worked his modest spread alone, speaking to no one except the occasional trader who passed through seeking water for their horses. The isolation suited him fine. People had a way of disappointing you, and he'd learned that lesson the hard way back in Kansas before he'd fled south to start over. "Hi, how are you? I'm interrupting quickly just to ask you to click on the like button and subscribe to the channel. This will help a lot. Thank you, and I hope you like the story." As Thunder picked his way carefully down a rocky slope, a sound caught Lonely Rancher's attention, a soft whimpering barely audible above the desert wind. He reined in his horse and listened intently. There it was again, coming from behind a cluster of mesquite trees near an old, dried creek bed. Drawing his Colt .45 from its holster, Lonely Rancher dismounted and approached cautiously. What he found made his blood run cold. A boy, no more than 12 years old, sat bound with rough rope against the largest mesquite tree. His clothes were torn and dirty, his face streaked with tears and dust. Dark hair fell across frightened brown eyes that widened when they spotted the approaching cowboy. "Easy there, son," Lonely Rancher said softly, holstering his weapon and raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you." The boy tried to speak, but only managed a hoarse croak. A dirty bandana had been stuffed in his mouth. Lonely Rancher quickly cut the bonds with his knife and gently removed the gag. "Water," the boy gasped. Lonely Rancher fetched his canteen and helped the child drink slowly. As color returned to the boy's pale cheeks, he began to speak in accented English. "My name is Adan Morales," he whispered. "The bandits. They took everything. Killed my papa and mama. Left me here to die." Lonely Rancher's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors of a particularly vicious gang operating along the border, men who showed no mercy to anyone, regardless of age or innocence. The Crimson Riders, they called themselves, led by a cold-blooded killer named Santiago Vega. "How long have you been here, boy?" "2 days, maybe 3. I lost count." Adan's voice broke. "They said the buzzards would clean up their mess." Rage burned in Lonely Rancher's chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Well, they were wrong about that. Can you ride?" Adan nodded weakly. "My papa taught me." "Good. We're getting you out of here." Lonely Rancher helped the boy to his feet, noting how thin he'd become. "There's a town called Redemption about 20 miles north. We can get you proper food and medical attention there." As they prepared to leave, Adan grabbed Lonely Rancher's arm. "Senor, there's something else. The bandits. They weren't just robbing. They were looking for something. A map, they said. Something about gold hidden in the old Spanish missions." Lonely Rancher frowned. He'd heard whispers of lost Spanish treasure, but he'd always dismissed such talk as frontier nonsense. "Did they find what they were looking for?" "No. Papa hid it well. But they'll be back. They said they'd return to search the ruins of our ranch." Adan's eyes filled with tears again. "They burned everything, senor. Everything." "Not everything," Lonely Rancher said firmly, placing a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. "They didn't get you." As they mounted Thunder together, Lonely Rancher couldn't shake the feeling that rescuing this boy was going to complicate his carefully ordered life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But looking down at Adan's grateful face, he realized he didn't care. For the first time in 15 years, he had a purpose beyond mere survival. The ride to redemption would take them through dangerous territory, and if the Crimson Riders were still in the area, they'd be riding straight into trouble. But as Thunder's hooves beat a steady rhythm across the desert floor, Lonely Rancher felt something he hadn't experienced in years. "Hope." "Senor," Adan said quietly as they rode, "why are you helping me?" You don't even know me." Lonely Rancher was quiet for a long moment, watching the horizon. "Sometimes, son, doing the right thing is reason enough. Besides," he added with the ghost of a smile, "seems to me you've had enough bad luck for one lifetime." Behind them, dust clouds began to form on the distant horizon. The Crimson Riders were indeed returning to the Morales Ranch, and they wouldn't be pleased to find their intended victim gone. The chase was about to begin, and Lonely Rancher knew that his decision to save this boy had just made him the most wanted man in West Texas. But as Adan's small arms tightened around his waist in trust and gratitude, Lonely Rancher realized he'd make the same choice again without hesitation. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it meant facing down the most dangerous outlaws on the frontier. The sun climbed higher as they rode toward redemption, and with it, their destiny. The town of Redemption appeared on the horizon like a mirage, its weathered buildings shimmering in the afternoon heat. Lonely Rancher had visited the settlement only twice before, both times to trade cattle for supplies. It wasn't much to look at. A main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a small church with a crooked steeple, and maybe 200 souls trying to scratch out a living in the unforgiving Texas landscape. As Thunder carried his two riders down the dusty main street, curious faces appeared in windows and doorways. Strangers were always noteworthy in Redemption, but a lone cowboy with a Mexican boy was bound to raise questions and suspicions. "Where should we go, senor?" Adan asked quietly, his voice still weak from his ordeal. "Doc Peterson's place first," Lonely Rancher replied, spotting the familiar shingle hanging outside a modest building. "Get you checked over proper." Dr. Margaret Peterson was one of the few female physicians on the frontier, a fact that had caused considerable controversy when she'd arrived in Redemption 3 years earlier. But her skill with both bullet wounds and childhood fevers had gradually won over even the most skeptical residents. They dismounted outside the doctor's office, and Lonely Rancher helped Adan down from the saddle. The boy's legs were still unsteady, and he leaned heavily against the hitching post. "Jack Riggins," came a stern voice from behind them. "Didn't expect to see you in town again so soon." Lonely Rancher turned to face Sheriff Tom Bradley, a heavy-set man with graying whiskers and suspicious eyes. Bradley had never much cared for the solitary rancher, viewing him as a potential troublemaker who kept too much to himself. "Sheriff," Lonely Rancher nodded curtly. "Found this boy out in the desert. Bandits left him for dead." Bradley's expression softened slightly as he looked at Adan's condition. "Mexican? His family had a ranch south of here. The Crimson Riders hit them hard." The sheriff's face darkened at the mention of Santiago Vega's gang. "Those bastards have been terrorizing the borderlands for months. We've had reports of at least 6 ranches burned out." He studied Adan more carefully. "You're lucky to be alive, boy." "Si, senor," Adan whispered. "Very lucky." Dr. Peterson emerged from her office having heard the commotion. She was a woman in her 30s with intelligent green eyes and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. "What seems to be the problem here?" "This boy needs medical attention," Lonely Rancher explained. "Been without food or water for days." "Bring him inside immediately," Dr. Peterson said, her professional demeanor taking over. "Sheriff, I'll need you to take a statement once I've examined him." As they helped Adan into the doctor's office, a crowd began to gather on the street. Word traveled fast in a small town, and the arrival of a Mexican boy with stories of bandit attacks was the most excitement Redemption had seen in months. "Folks are getting nervous," Sheriff Bradley observed, watching the growing crowd through the window. "There's been talk about the Mexican family south of here bringing trouble our way." "This boy didn't bring trouble," Lonely Rancher said sharply. "Trouble found him." Dr. Peterson worked efficiently, checking Adan for injuries while asking gentle questions about his ordeal. The boy was dehydrated and malnourished, but otherwise unharmed. As she prepared a tonic to help restore his strength, Adan spoke quietly to Lonely Rancher. "Senor, I must tell you something important. The map the bandits were seeking. I know where it is." Lonely Rancher's attention sharpened. "Where?" "My papa gave it to me before they came. Made me promise to keep it safe." Adan reached into his torn shirt and withdrew a small, oiled leather pouch. He said it was our family's legacy, passed down from my great-grandfather who worked in the Spanish missions. Sheriff Bradley leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the pouch. What kind of map, boy? It shows the location of gold hidden by Spanish priests when they fled the missions during the Mexican War of Independence. Papa said it was worth more than all the cattle in Texas. The room fell silent. Dr. Peterson paused in her work, and even she seemed intrigued by the boy's revelation. That's quite a story, Sheriff Bradley said slowly. Mind if I take a look at that map? Adan clutched the pouch tighter and looked to Lonely Rancher for guidance. Something in the sheriff's tone had changed, becoming more calculating than protective. The boy's been through enough for one day, Lonely Rancher said firmly. Maybe we should let him rest before— Now hold on, Jack, Bradley interrupted, his hand moving unconsciously toward his gun. If that map is real, it could solve a lot of problems for this town. We've been struggling to survive out here, and that kind of treasure could change everything. It could also get everyone killed, Lonely Rancher pointed out. The Crimson Riders are still looking for it, and they won't hesitate to burn down this entire town to get it. Dr. Peterson stepped between them, her voice calm but authoritative. Gentlemen, this discussion can wait. This child needs rest and proper nutrition. Whatever decisions need to be made can be made tomorrow. But even as she spoke, they could hear voices rising outside. The crowd was growing larger and more agitated. Someone had clearly overheard their conversation about the map and Spanish gold, and word was spreading like wildfire through the streets of Redemption. Too late for that, Doc, Sheriff Bradley said grimly, looking out the window. Looks like the whole town's about to get involved. Lonely Rancher moved protectively closer to Adan, his hand resting on his gun. He'd hoped to find safety in Redemption, but it was becoming clear that the boy's secret had just made them the center of a dangerous situation. Outside, he could hear heated arguments breaking out as neighbors debated what should be done about the map and its young guardian. What do we do now, senor? Adan asked, fear creeping back into his voice. Lonely Rancher looked at the frightened boy, then at the growing mob outside, and made a decision that would define the rest of their journey together. We trust each other, son, and we get ready to fight for what's right. By evening, the entire population of Redemption had gathered in the town's small church to debate the fate of Adan and his mysterious map. Lonely Rancher sat in the back pew with the boy, watching as neighbors who had lived peacefully together for years now argued with increasing hostility. Mayor William Hutchinson, a portly man who owned the general store, stood at the front of the church attempting to maintain order. Now, folks, let's discuss this rationally. If this map is genuine, it could provide the resources our town desperately needs. And if it brings the Crimson Riders down on us, we'll all be dead, shouted Martha Collins, the schoolteacher. I say we send the boy away before he gets us all killed. That's not Christian charity, Martha, protested Reverend Samuel Hayes, a thin man with kind eyes. This child has suffered enough. We have a moral obligation to protect him. Moral obligations don't stop bullets, called out Frank Morrison, the blacksmith. I've got a wife and 3 children to think about. Lonely Rancher watched the debate with growing unease. He'd seen this before, good people turning on each other when fear and greed took hold. The map had become a symbol of everything the struggling town wanted: prosperity, security, a future. But it was also a death sentence for anyone who possessed it. Sheriff Bradley stood up, his badge glinting in the lamplight. I've been thinking about this all afternoon, and I believe I have a solution. We turn the map over to the territorial authorities in Austin. Let them deal with the treasure and the bandits. And lose our chance at the gold? Mayor Hutchinson protested. Tom, that treasure could fund a railroad spur to Redemption, bring in new businesses, new families. We'd finally have a real future here. If we live long enough to see it, Dr. Peterson interjected from her seat near the front. I've treated enough gunshot wounds to know what happens when desperate men fight over treasure. Adan tugged on Lonely Rancher's sleeve. Senor, they talk about me like I'm not here, like the map is theirs to decide about. Lonely Rancher's jaw tightened. The boy was right. In their excitement over the potential treasure, the townspeople had forgotten that Adan was a human being who had just lost everything he'd ever known. Maybe it's time we heard from the boy himself, Lonely Rancher said, standing up. His voice carried clearly through the church, and the room gradually fell silent. Mayor Hutchinson frowned. "Jack, this is a town meeting. You're not even a resident of Redemption." "No, but I'm the one who found him. And I'm the one who brought him here seeking help, not exploitation." Lonely Rancher's steel-gray eyes swept the room. "You want to know what I think? I think you've all forgotten what you're supposed to stand for." "Now see here," Sheriff Bradley began, but Lonely Rancher cut him off. "This boy watched his parents murdered. He was left to die in the desert. And the first thing you people do when he asks for help is start fighting over his inheritance." Lonely Rancher's voice grew harder. "That map belonged to his family. It's his decision what to do with it, not yours." Reverend Hayes nodded approvingly. "Jack's right. We're supposed to be a Christian community. When did we become a pack of vultures?" "Easy words from a man who doesn't have to worry about feeding his family," Frank Morrison shot back. "Some of us are barely scraping by. That treasure could change everything." "And what if it's not real?" Dr. Peterson asked. "What if it's just an old family story passed down through generations? We could be destroying our community over a fantasy." Adan stood up suddenly, his young voice cutting through the adult arguments. "It's real," he said quietly. "My great-grandfather was there when the priests buried it. He helped them hide it from the soldiers." The church fell completely silent. All eyes turned to the small boy who had endured so much. "But my papa always said the gold was cursed," Adan continued, his voice growing stronger. "Every man who sought it brought death to his family. That's why we never looked for it, even when times were hard." "Superstitious nonsense," Mayor Hutchinson scoffed, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Adan asked, meeting the mayor's eyes. "The bandits killed my family for this map. How many more will die if the fighting continues?" Lonely Rancher felt a surge of pride at the boy's courage. Despite everything he'd been through, Adan was showing more wisdom than the adults around him. "So what do you want to do, son?" Lonely Rancher asked gently. Adan looked around the room at the faces of the people who would decide his fate. Some showed greed, others fear, but a few, like Dr. Peterson and Reverend Hayes, showed genuine concern for his welfare. "I want to destroy it," Adan said finally. "Burn the map and end the curse forever." The church erupted in shocked protests. Mayor Hutchinson jumped to his feet. "You can't be serious. That treasure could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars." "And how many lives is that worth?" Adan asked quietly. Sheriff Bradley's hand moved to his gun. "Now hold on, boy. You're not thinking clearly. You're traumatized, confused. Maybe we should hold on to that map until you're feeling better." Lonely Rancher stepped protectively in front of Adan. "The boy's thinking more clearly than anyone else in this room. And if anyone tries to take that map from him by force, they'll have to go through me first." The tension in the church was palpable. Neighbors stared at neighbors, measuring loyalties and calculating odds. The community that had once stood together against the harsh frontier was fracturing before their eyes. "There's another way," Dr. Peterson said suddenly, standing up. "What if we use the map not for treasure hunting, but as bait? Draw the Crimson Riders into a trap and end their reign of terror once and for all." The suggestion hung in the air like smoke from a campfire. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it offered something the other options didn't: a chance to do the right thing while protecting the community. Lonely Rancher looked down at Adan, seeing the weight of decision in the boy's young eyes. Whatever they chose, there would be no going back. 3 days later, the trap was set. Dr. Peterson's plan had been refined through careful discussion among the few townspeople willing to risk everything for justice. Word had been deliberately leaked through traveling merchants that the map was being held in Redemption's bank vault, waiting for territorial authorities to arrive from Austin. Lonely Rancher crouched behind the water trough across from the bank, his rifle ready. Beside him, Adan clutched a small bag containing the real map. There, insurance policy should the plan go wrong. The boy had insisted on being part of the operation, despite Lonely Rancher's protests. "You sure about this, son?" Lonely Rancher whispered. "Si, senor. My family deserves justice, and these people deserve to live without fear." Around the town square, Sheriff Bradley and 6 volunteers were positioned in carefully chosen locations. Dr. Peterson waited in her office, ready to treat any wounded. Reverend Hayes had organized the women and children in the church basement, praying for their men's safe return. The sun was setting when the Crimson Riders finally appeared. Santiago Vega led 12 hardened killers down the main street, their horses' hooves thundering against the packed earth. They made no attempt at stealth. Why should they? They'd terrorized this region for months without serious opposition. Vega was a tall, lean man with cold black eyes and a scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. He wore twin colts and carried himself with the arrogance of a man who had never met his match. "People of redemption," Vega called out, his voice echoing off the buildings. "We know you have something that belongs to us. Hand over the Morales map, and we'll leave your town standing." Sheriff Bradley stepped out from behind the barber shop, his badge glinting in the fading light. "Santiago Vega, you're under arrest for murder, robbery, and terrorizing peaceful citizens." Vega's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass. "Tom Bradley, you always were a fool. You think your little town can stand against us?" "I think evil men eventually meet their match," Bradley replied steadily. The standoff stretched for long seconds. Then Vega's hand moved toward his gun, and the street exploded into violence. Lonely Rancher's first shot took down the bandit nearest to Adan's position. His second dropped another rider before the man could clear leather. Around the square, the hidden defenders opened fire, catching the Crimson Riders in a deadly crossfire. But Vega's men were experienced killers. They quickly took cover and began returning fire with devastating accuracy. Frank Morrison cried out as a bullet shattered his shoulder. Another defender fell silent behind the general store. "They're too good!" Sheriff Bradley shouted over the gunfire. "We can't hold them!" Vega had taken cover behind an overturned wagon and was systematically picking off the defenders. His remaining men were advancing on the bank, believing the map was inside. "Senor," Adan whispered urgently, "I have an idea, but you must trust me." Before Lonely Rancher could stop him, the boy was running across the street toward the church, the map clutched in his hands. "I have it!" he shouted. "I have the real map!" Vega's head snapped around, his eyes locking onto the running boy. "Kill him!" he roared. "But don't damage the map!" Bullets kicked up dust around Adan's feet as he reached the church steps. Lonely Rancher was already moving, laying down covering fire as he sprinted after the boy. Inside the church, Adan ran straight to the altar where Reverend Hayes waited with a lit torch. "Do it, Reverend! Burn it now!" "Boy, what are you—" Hayes began, then understood. Without hesitation, he grabbed the leather pouch and held it over the flame. Vega burst through the church doors just as the ancient map caught fire. "No!" he screamed, raising his gun toward Adan. Lonely Rancher's shot took Vega in the chest, spinning him around. But the bandit leader wasn't finished. With his dying breath, he aimed at the boy who had destroyed his dreams of treasure. The shot echoed through the church like thunder. But it was Lonely Rancher who staggered, blood spreading across his shirt as he stepped between Vega and Adan. "Senor!" Adan caught the falling cowboy, tears streaming down his face. "It's okay, son," Lonely Rancher gasped. "You did good, real good." Outside, the remaining bandits were surrendering as Sheriff Bradley and the surviving defenders closed in. Without their leader and with their prize destroyed, the fight had gone out of them. Dr. Peterson arrived within minutes, her medical bag in hand. "Get him to my office immediately," she ordered, examining Lonely Rancher's wound. "The bullet missed his heart, but he's lost a lot of blood." For 3 days, Lonely Rancher hovered between life and death while Dr. Peterson fought to save him. Adan never left his bedside, reading to him from the Bible and telling him stories about his family's ranch. On the 4th morning, Lonely Rancher's eyes opened to find the boy asleep in a chair beside the bed. "Adan," he whispered. The boy woke instantly, his face lighting up with joy. "Senor, you're alive! Takes more than one bullet to kill an old cowboy," Lonely Rancher said with a weak smile. "How are you holding up, son?" "Better now. The town council met yesterday. They want to offer you a permanent position as deputy sheriff." And they want to help me start a new ranch where my family's land used to be. Lonely Rancher felt something he hadn't experienced in 15 years, a sense of belonging. What do you think about that? I think, Adan said carefully, that I would like to learn ranching from the best teacher in Texas, if you'll have me as a partner. Lonely Rancher reached out and ruffled the boy's hair. Partners it is, son. Partners it is. 6 months later, the Riggins Morales Ranch was thriving. Lonely Rancher had found his family in an orphaned boy, and Adan had found a father in a man who had forgotten how to trust. The town of Redemption had lived up to its name, becoming a place where broken souls could heal, and new beginnings were always possible. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the Texas sky, knowing that they had found something more valuable than any Spanish treasure. They had found each other. The curse of the map was broken, but the blessing of their bond would last forever. Hello, how are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel The Best Wild West to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much and come back often.